This is what the ancient Egyptians would actually look like. Dark-skinned, olive tone, like myself. You can clearly tell from all their depictions. This accurately depicts me. Studies found that they're closely related to the Middle Eastern regions such as Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, etc. Leave my pharaohs and my people out of your mouth.
Let's pause here. This video went viral on Twitter a few months ago, and it ends quite well with another guy explaining how biased was the study mentioned by the Egyptian guy. However, all this reminded me of my last video about how ancient civilizations portrayed the ancient Egyptians. It was already inspired by another viral post about the look of the ancient Egyptians according to modern populations. There are numerous depictions of people from Kemet available today inside museums. Some are widely displayed like these random scribes, for example, while others are hidden like those of most pharaohs. Are you aware that today, this seemingly random scribe has become so popular that his image appears on Egyptian currency? Sometimes, I wonder if he would have ever thought to become this famous after his death. Today, this man's face is more famous than those of the majority of pharaohs. Anyway, so why are we here? Well, as you can see, there is always a debate about what ancient Egyptians looked like. Constantly. Modern populations keep telling us that nothing changed, while numerous artifacts and significant monuments like the Great Sphinx tell us otherwise. That's why, in order to get more perspective, I decided to look at how other civilizations depicted these ancient Egyptians. I believe that sometimes the best way to know who we are is through other people's eyes. Because sometimes we have blind spots or we try to embellish our image. This is why gaining insight into how others perceived ancient Egyptians can be profoundly valuable. After making that first video, I discovered more depictions of ancient Egyptians from ancient civilizations. But it was too late to add them to the video. So I simply ignored them to not delay the publishing of that video. However, upon observing these visuals, I realized that some of them were too good to be ignored, so I decided to make a part 2. So, here is: how did ancient civilizations depict the ancient Egyptians? Part 2. As mentioned in the video introduction, this is the second part of a video I made, so I advise you to go watch the first part before watching this one, because both videos are complementary. For those who already watched that video, welcome aboard and let's start. In my first video, we went from Antiquity to the Renaissance era. However, our focus primarily revolved around Greek and Roman art. Basically, it was focused on ancient Europeans' perception of ancient Egyptians, which is, to be honest, significant enough. But I discovered some other visuals and got some additional commentaries from you that completed the previous video. They provided such enlightening perspectives that I couldn't overlook them. By the way, never hesitate to leave your opinion in the comments section. I really enjoy reading your point of views, and I also learn from you. We are in this journey together, trying to find out the truth. Always feel free to share your opinion, it helps and inspire me. So, based on the first video, we know that ancient Egyptians were seen as indigenous black Africans by the ancient Europeans who met them. We also noticed that something did not make sense in the way Greeks depicted the Africans they met in North Africa. Because in their art, we don't see people looking like the modern North African we see today. People like the guy appearing in that TikTok video, for example. We will start with some mistakes I made in the first video. The Nile Mosaic of Palestrina. In the first video, I mentioned the Nile Mosaic of Palestrina, and I noticed an issue with it. According to most sources, the mosaic featured detailed depictions of Ptolemaic Greeks and Ethiopians who are other black Africans living in the south. But there was no mention of Egyptians, as if the populations had simply vanished. But some of you contacted me in the comments to confirm what I felt while making that video. Initially, I had my doubts. But after watching it carefully, I noticed that I missed a few details. So, you were right, guys. Many people are depicted in the mosaic. And we know that the mosaic is representative of the Nile Valley, right? Here at the bottom, there is no doubt that we can see a Greco-Roman population. Then, in the first video, I identified the Ethiopians, also known as Nubians or Black Africans. And that's all I noticed. But I did not highlight these other Ethiopians. Are they also Ethiopians? Well, following the way they are depicted, that's what we may assume, and that's what I thought. To be honest, I did not even notice them because I didn't question the mainstream narrative, which is a huge mistake. Everywhere on the internet, the mosaic is simply described as a piece of art depicting Ethiopians and Greeks. But to a trained eye, some little details prove that it's not the case. And I am going to decrypt the mosaic for you now. The first hint is simply in the name of that mosaic. It is called the Nile, Mosaic of Palestrina. In other words, it depicts the Nile River, its valley, and its population at that time. The second element that I didn't notice is this group of Ethiopians here. As mentioned earlier, they look exactly like the other group of black people. But there is a difference between them. The ones located at the bottom mainly carry shields and what looks like spears, while those located on top exclusively carry bows. The Ethiopians or Nubians' land was known as Ta-Seti, or the land of the bow, which makes complete sense. But this other group I initially identified as Nubians don't have bows. Well, personally, the first idea that came to my mind was that all members of an army don't carry bows, which makes total sense. An army is made of numerous types of units, each having its utility. But there is a last detail that contradicts that theory. It's the fact that the mosaic was created in a very informative style with a strong sense of symbolism. When we look at it carefully, we can see that those who created it knew exactly what they were doing, adding very specific details, and you will understand it at the end. The people who created this mosaic possessed a very advanced knowledge of Kemet. The symbolism used to create it is so accurate, so Kemetic, so Egyptian, that now that I fully understand it, it completely blows my mind. And that's also why I did not fully understand this in the beginning. Today, when we look at the map of the world, it looks like this, right? That's how cartographers and geographers who are in majority Europeans show our world. This choice is not an accident because it puts Europe at the center and on top of Africa. But this perspective is actually very new. Back in the day, especially according to ancient Egyptians, the world looked like this. So, according to them, our modern maps are upside down. They believed that South Africa was North Africa and North Africa was South Africa. That's also why Upper Egypt is located in the south according to our modern maps, while Lower Egypt is our north. They followed the flow of the Nile, and it completely aligns with all their origin narratives, like the Edfu texts, for example. If you want to learn more about it, you can watch this video. Now you may be wondering, why am I talking about this? What happened to the Nile mosaic, remember? Don't worry, you will get it very soon. I'm talking about this because the Nile mosaic has been built exactly following that ancient Egyptian logic. The Greeks are located at the bottom of the map. At first I found it weird, but that's actually logical. The Greeks are in the delta, and the delta is in the Egyptian south. Then we have the Ethiopians with the bows, who are located on top of the map, which makes complete sense since Nubia is in the Egyptian north. And this info is what completely debunks the narrative claiming that the mosaic only depicts Ethiopians and Greeks. Because these are Ethiopians, these are Greeks, and these are the Upper Egyptians. Following the logic that this is the Nile Valley, this area is Lower Egypt, this is Upper Egypt, and this is Nubia. Each area has a specific population, which makes complete sense. All this empty space in between Upper Egyptians and Greeks may look weird at first, but in fact it coincides with the numerous accounts from Greeks and Romans talking about major ancient Egyptian cities getting emptied after the Greco-Roman invasions. The Egyptians of these areas migrated south to avoid persecution, taxes, and executions. They settled a bit further south. And as you can see, the Greeks depicted these Egyptians exactly identical to Nubians or other black Africans. This is indeed surprising because, following what many people say, ancient Egyptians always depicted themselves different from Nubians, who were the true blacks. Well, that's actually false. If you have watched my video about the 25th dynasty or the one about the Red Crown of Egypt, you have probably seen this painting. It depicts Upper Egyptians, Lower Egyptians, and other ethnic groups from Asia and Africa. And you can see that during the 18th dynasty, this is what the average Upper Egyptian looked like. And as you can see, he looks exactly like Nubians with his afro. But this is not the only evidence. We also have this painting from the tomb of Ramses III in the Valley of Kings. Here it depicts the whole population of Egypt identical in all points to Nubians. But there is more. Here we can see what is probably the most significant artifact in the history of Kemet, the Palette of Narmer. It depicts the first pharaoh with his people who were Upper Egyptians, defeating the tribes of Lower Egypt. And as you can see, the Upper Egyptians are depicted in the same style. There is a consistency in that visual identity. They all have tropical features and afro hair. The style is similar to the one used for Nubians. So, we see that the ancient Egyptian iconography has always linked Upper Egypt to Nubia. There is a consistency all over the history of Kemet. I believe that this validates all this theory about the Mosaic. Because we also know that the Ptolemies struggled with Upper Egypt. When the Romans came, it was a known problem that in the South Egyptians were rebelling and unruly. It also explains the hostile nature of these representations. They all carry weapons. Contrary to what the mainstream claims, the Mosaic does not depict Ethiopians and Greco-Romans. It depicts Greco-Romans, ancient Egyptians, and Nubians. We can even see the feather for confirmation here. And ancient Egyptians are depicted identical to black people. Thus, my initial intuition proved correct. It was weird to not see Egyptians on their own land, and now we understand why. Because Egyptians were black people. But maybe you still don't believe me, so let's go a bit deeper. There are two other details that confirm this. Details that end all debate. The first one is that this group of people I identified as Upper Egyptians carry shields and javelins. And when we look at Egyptian art, we notice that when they depicted Nubians, they gave them bows. But when they depicted their own units, they gave them javelins and shields. So, this theory seems to be true. But once again, maybe you are still doubting me. So, let's discover the last key. These Upper Egyptian units stand on this block of land, next to a temple dedicated to Osiris. But there is an additional symbol that proves that this is Egypt and not Nubia. On the entrance, there is a distinctly Greek element, which is the Ptolemaic eagle above the doorway. Evidence that these black people live in Egypt. Thus, we have confirmed that all these pieces of art, commonly labeled as Black African in European art, are actually depicting Egyptians or ancient North Africans. However, given their similarity to depictions of other black people from Inner Africa, which makes them differ from modern populations of North Africa, the mainstream convinced us that these were black Africans and not Egyptians who are supposed to look like modern North Africans. Do you understand the manipulation now? Let's shift our focus to another Greek representation. In the first video, I mentioned the vases depicting Osiris facing Heracles. I showed you 3 vases depicting Egyptians according to the Greeks, but there are more vases about that story. And this is what the Greeks depicted. As you can see, once again it completely validates our first video. Ancient Egyptians are depicted as black Africans, with very short hair, very short noses, sometimes flat. But always with some significant subnasal prognathism. The feature in the aesthetic that differentiates Africans from non-African populations today. That's what gives Africans that specific look that we can also see on the Great Sphinx, especially on this piece. Now, let's leave Europe and let's go to ancient Persia. The Persian Empire invaded and even occupied Kemet multiple times. We have numerous depictions of Nubians in their art. I always wondered why they never depicted ancient Egyptians. Then someone sent me the following image. It is supposed to depict an Egyptian, but the depiction seems a bit generic contrary to the Greek ones. We see the short hair, but even in style, it seems to lack identity. The nose remains short, but there is nothing we can really say about this visual. So, let's just move to the next visual. Assyria. Assyria was a major ancient Mesopotamian civilization which existed as a city-state from the 21st century BC to the 14th century BC, then to a territorial state, and eventually an empire from the 14th century BC to the 7th century BC. The 671 BC conquest of Egypt under Esarhaddon brought Assyria to its greatest ever extent. So, Assyrians occupied Kemet, and they depicted their conquests in the area. But there is an issue with these depictions. They are considered biased. Biased because when Assyrians invaded Kemet, the country was under the rule and protection of the pharaohs of the 25th dynasty who came directly from Nubia. So, according to many specialists, the people fighting the Assyrians were Nubians and not Egyptians. Here's what Assyrians depicted. And to be honest, I kind of agreed with that statement. That's why I did not add this to the first video. But this was until one of you guys made me realize a specific detail. The people depicted being captured by Assyrians have different outfits. When I double-checked, I noticed that it was true. The problem is that all of them look similar if we are not careful. They all carry black Africans features. But as soon as we start looking in details, it is obvious that we have black people belonging to separate groups. Here we can see a Nubian. It is obvious because of the feather on his head. That's even how ancient Egyptians depicted Nubians. Always with these feather diadems. Then we have the other group without these feather diadems, with very short hair. What makes me think that the ones without the feathers are the Egyptians is the fact that they look exactly like the people we see in Greek art, here. The hair is also styled the same way. And it is just common sense to believe that Nubians were not fighting alone, and that Egyptians were also defending their country. That's common sense, especially in Memphis, which is located in the Delta. So, once again we have Egyptians depicted similar to other indigenous Africans by a foreign group. Now let's make a jump in time and go to around 900 BC with Phoenician art found in the city of Nimrud. There has been found this beautiful ivory plaque of a lioness mauling a man. The piece has simply been labeled Lioness Mauling an African. The lioness is standing over her victim who has his knees drawn up and is lying back supported by his hands on the ground behind him. The lioness is biting his throat. Apparently we don't have any info about the man's origins. So why am I adding it to the list? Well, I have learned from my previous mistakes. For this one, I decided to analyze the piece a bit deeper to decrypt what may be hidden by scholars. Many things make me think that this is an Egyptian man. The first one is the hairstyle with tight curls of hair represented by gilt-topped ivory pegs. To fully understand why this specific design links him to ancient Egypt, I advise you to watch this video where I talk about the symbolism in ancient Egyptian crowns. But this may not be enough to convince you, and I can understand. That's why there is this second element which I think is quite significant. It is the fact that the so-called African wears a short skirt represented by gold leaf. Why is that significant, you may ask? Well, because these types of skirts are specific to ancient Egyptians. They were worn by all other Africans too, but in this very detailed style, to me it is the royal Egyptian iconography. But maybe you are still doubting me. And as the saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words, so here is my main evidence. We can clearly see the exact same golden skirt worn by Amenhotep III, and we even have the Kepresh crown symbolism. And let's not forget that the Egyptians were the only Africans who shared a direct border with Phoenicia. To Phoenicians, they were the Africans. I don't know about you, but to me, it's clear that this is an Egyptian and he is depicted as a black man. Now, let's move back to Europe, in Italy, in the St. Mark's Basilica. It contains more than 8,000 square meters of mosaic covering its walls, vaults, and cupolas. Essentially Byzantine in its architecture, the basilica finds in the mosaics its natural integrating element. The mosaic decorations mostly date from the 12th century. Among these decorations, there is a specific piece that interests us. It is the one depicting Egyptians. This is what these European artists depicted. It is done in a very European style, but we can clearly see that for these European artists hired by the European elite, the Egyptians were a very dark-skinned population with hair that seems to be woolly, and once again short or flat noses. But maybe you think that this is an accident, so I decided to show you other visuals from the same basilica as evidence that they knew exactly how to depict people who were not black and who had straight hair, but they intentionally depicted ancient Egyptians as black people with woolly hair. And before concluding, I need you to compare these Egyptians from the St. Mark Basilica with those appearing on the Nile Mosaic of Palestrina. Do you see the connection? Seems like our theory was correct. So, we see another depiction of Egyptians as black people in ancient foreign art. These visual representations contradict everything we've been taught. Once again, it's fascinating how perceptions can shift over time, and it begs us to reflect on the intricate interplay of cultural representation and identity. Let's keep the conversation going. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that representation matters, or is it okay to have ancient Egyptians portrayed like what we see in Hollywood and video games today? I am open to engaging in further discussion in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and support the channel. It allows me to improve the quality of my videos. Thanks for watching Mr. Imhotep's channel, and see you in the next video.